Quite wet day with quite persistent rain across Scotland and some hill snow developing on the northern edge of this front over the mountains. Cold in the north, but still quite mild actually in the south, temperatures well into double figures. And then a wet night to come across parts of Scotland in particular, with potential for quite significant snowfall above about 400 metres. So something to bear in mind if you're travelling in that part of the world. Elsewhere though, we should see another drier interlude with a few clear spells coming through from time to time, and now with some damp ground, potentially for some fog patches as well. But on the whole, it will not be as cold on Christmas Eve morning as it has been for some recent mornings. So certainly watch out for the fog first thing on Christmas Eve. If you have travel plans, that could take a time to clear across central southern England, parts of eastern England too. Helped though by increasing amounts of cloud and a breeze from the west. So some heavy rain coming into parts of southwest England, Wales and Northern Ireland through Christmas Eve through the day. Elsewhere though, it should be mostly dry, and drier for Scotland certainly in the last couple of days. Drier but colder. We're still in the cold air here, mild air to the southwest, and the dividing line will be weather fronts. And it's along this dividing line we probably stand the greatest chance of seeing a little bit of snow through Christmas. So whilst a lot of places will be quite wet at times, quite unsettled, with some colder air to the north though, that's where your best chances of seeing some snow. Take care.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
A very good morning to you and happy Christmas. It's 9 o'clock this morning and we've got a big show, the last show of the year, in fact, for The Briefing. We'll be back, of course, over the Christmas period, but with special Christmas programming. This programme we'll be going to look back over the year. We'll be looking at what's happened politically. We'll be looking about what may well be happening next year as well. Looking at the Labour Party, looking at the epidemiological situation of the country and looking at the polls. It's 9 o'clock. You're watching The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood. Well, that was the political year, that was. This is the last morning briefing of the year, but don't go anywhere. I'll be hosting some brilliant Christmas Eve content throughout the day tomorrow on GB News as we enter our exciting Christmas scheduling. Now, I thought it would be a good opportunity to look back on the political year. It started, of course, having just secured a trade and cooperation agreement with the EU, ending that transition period and setting us free to change our own regulations and strike new trade deals with other countries. But it wasn't all good news. On the 3rd of January, the government urged all children to return to schools, only to shut them one day later, Remember that? Yes, lockdown began properly on the 4th of January 2021. It would not be lifted until March. On the 8th of March, once again, it became legal to sit on a park bench. What an extraordinary time to be alive. By May, we saw the biggest set of elections take place concurrently in the middle of a parliamentary term in UK history. By order of population, London elected a mayor and an assembly where Sadiq Khan won, but only after transfer votes. Scotland elected a new parliament and the SNP failed to gain a majority. The West Midlands re-elected Conservative Andy Street as mayor, while Labour performed surprisingly strongly in Wales. Andy Burnham, of course, won the Manchester mayoralty with an impressive 67% of the vote, while Conservative Ben Houchen won the Tees Valley mayoralty with an astonishing 73%. And of course, that astonishing Hartlepool by-election result too, when the Tories sensationally picked up a seat from Labour in the middle of one of their terms, adding to their big majority. Although that was promptly negated with the loss of Chesham and Amersham to the Lib Dems just 1 month later. Indeed, the Tories failed to pick up Batley and Spen as well. Despite big expectations, Labour marginally held the seat. And just this month, of course, the Tories held Old Bexley and Sidcup, but sensationally lost North Shropshire to the Lib Dems. It's clear the Lib Dems are back as that by-election force they once were. Elsewhere, of course, we saw 2 cabinet resignations. The Health Secretary over a personal affair, and more damningly, the Brexit Minister over the political direction of the government. We were, of course, put on a one-way road to freedom in the summer, only to then do an about-turn on that road this month, as Omicron reared its ugly head. There were about 1 million U-turns, from exams to self-isolation, cutting foreign aid to raising national insurance. A pingdemic, a lorry driver shortage, a messy Labour conference, a row over cervixes, a vaccine passport hokey-cokey, and the biggest parliamentary rebellion of Boris Johnson's premiership. And it just feels like all things are getting started. 2021 was the year real politics returned. And I'm so looking forward to covering what comes next in 2022. Now, over the last 12 months, the Labour Party has been attempting to demonstrate it has changed. After a torrid 2 months for the Tory party, not least that staggering by-election loss in North Shropshire, many are now starting to wonder if it's over for the Tory party and if Labour is truly on the path to number 10. Well, to dissect this question with me is John McTernan, the former political director, or rather director of political operations for Tony Blair. Welcome to the programme, John. First of all, the Labour Party has been trying very hard to demonstrate that it has changed over the course of the last 12 months. Do you think that's cut through?
I think the bookends of that would be Jeremy Corbyn's not a Labour MP. Important, symbolic, significant. And the end of the year, Wes Streeting is Labour's Shadow Secretary of State for Health, and showing the kind of maturity, the kind of parliamentary performance, the kind of wisdom in a young man, the kind of wisdom and maturity that shows you Labour's got what is needed to form a cabinet. I think you're looking now a Labour Party that has turned its back on Corbyn and Corbynism and has actually produced a shadow cabinet that, pound for pound, is easily the match of the current cabinet. So, yeah, look, I think Labour has had a really important year.
The polls, the Labour Party has jumped ahead, although I wonder how much of that is actually the Labour Party cutting through, whereas it might be more to do with the fact that the Tories keep shooting themselves in the foot.
Well, in one sense, it doesn't really matter because, you know, we are, how many weeks is it since the Prime Minister was briefing the papers that he was going to have 10 years like Margaret Thatcher? Doesn't feel like that, does it? That feels like that was a hubristic statement. It was, you know, it was hubristic when he made it, and it's proven to be hubristic. The reality is, in the British system and a parliamentary system, particularly when you've got a landslide of of over 80 seats, majority in the government, when you have a landslide defeat, it really is a mountain to climb, except that governments do in the end lose elections, and oppositions very rarely win them. And I think that's the situation we're in. So does it matter to the Labour Party that this may be the government screwing up rather than the Labour Party being a safe haven for the country? I don't think so, because politics is a contrast game apart from anything else. And when those guys don't look good, Labour has to look like a safe pair of hands. And if you want, you want to describe Keir, you'd say that Keir is really the opposite of Boris Johnson. And one way, Boris is funny and affable and humorous and big character and all those things. And Keir is very straightforward, very almost dull, man with a plan, sticks to his brief, understands his brief. But the other thing is, the thing that Keir said over when the Owen Paterson thing started, which was really the beginning of the government's troubles. I put MPs in jail when they were breaking the rules. You try to change the rules. And that, I think, is a big difference. And that kind of is cutting through. In that sense, the contrast is set so that Labour is the safe pair of hands. Labour is the party of the NHS. Labour is the party you'd want in charge of a moment when you're moving towards rebuilding public services, rebuilding social care, reinvesting in the public realm. And so I think Labour's been doing the quiet work of getting itself ready to take the opportunity when it comes, and the opportunities come. Opportunity like it's a cornucopia of opportunities, isn't it? Like it's smorgasbord of opportunities. So many things to do. But Labour's taken advantage of every single error the Tories have made since the beginning of November. It's been a pretty bad 2 months for them, hasn't it?
Certainly has, although I can't help but notice that across the spectrum of political commentary, quite often the mantle of leader of the opposition is given to various other people, whether it be Marcus Rashford, whether it be the Daily Mirror's Pippa Crerar, whether it be even sometimes Mark Harper and the Tory COVID recovery group. Is Keir Starmer giving too much space to these other figures to sort of battle the government in the place of the Labour Party?
The thing about a government, when it's on the nose, you get to know that because everybody turns on it. And so it's not, Pippa's a great journalist. Pippa's got sources, and those sources are inside the government. So the government's turning on itself. That sardonic Ed Balls comment that that picture of the cheese and wine party last May, that looks to have come from inside number 11. Those kinds of things. And so you've got Marcus Rashford, a footballer with a great big heart. A heart as great as his talent, I suppose. But also somebody who's active in civil society, active in charities, active in NGOs. You've got that side of the country. You've got inside in the government. You've got the Labour Party putting up an alternative. That's kind of what you need. An opposition doesn't win it on its own. The government's got to fall out of touch with the public, and I think that's one of the most defining elements of government opposition struggles is who can say I'm on your side, and who can be accused of being out of touch. Boris had for months, for years, like that was his special gift. People would always go, look, he's on our side, he's got us, he understands us, he gets us, and now the phrase is definitely out of touch. And the problem is, once you become out of touch, you can't ever earn back on your side. It's a binary, and you have it, and then you don't have it. And that is the problem that the government have. The Tory backbenchers would love to find a way to get another Boris, but there is only one Boris. And they don't have another leader who can unite the home counties and the West Midlands and the Northeast, and make some of the breaks that they need to make into the Northwest if they're actually going to be significant. If this red wall thing is a real change, I don't see, the attraction of Priti Patel or Rishi Sunak or Sajid Javid running particularly strongly in the old Labour seats in the Northeast. I think for all kinds of reasons, mainly competence, but also attitude towards public spending. There's real difficulties of the potential successors to Boris Johnson Boris was a Hail Mary pass, hugely successful Hail Mary pass for the Tory party, but he concealed their internal contradictions. Labour, torrid time, no doubt. You know, two terrible leaders in a row, Corbyn and Miliband, 4 election defeats in a row. But that's really the challenge for the Tory party. They're looking for unprecedented 5th term in government. Never happened in the period of the democratic franchise in the UK. Their plan, their strategy was a clear one. Change to Boris and then make this the first Boris Johnson government and then pivot to the second Boris Johnson government. So you avoid all the staleness, the 4 terms, 5 terms, running out of ideas, losing momentum. The problem is the PM only had the momentum of being himself. He didn't have ideas, didn't have a strategy, didn't have a program. And he had a crisis which he dealt with. He's dealt with that well. By and large, he dealt with COVID well. But as that crisis recedes, politics as normal is back. And that's exposing the contradiction. The reason why Mark Harper and Tory backbenchers are so significant in the list you gave us of Boris Johnson's opposition or opponents is the Tory party has an unreconciled internal contradiction between the kind of party it wants to be. And having tasted the success of rolling Theresa May for Boris Johnson, you know, the thing is, the people who've done it once think they can do it again. And they've got an ideological purity about it. And they remind me of momentum or militant, that the view of the Mark Harper end of the Tory party is, if you're only more like us, we'd be more successful. And the one thing about Boris is that he gets, the public don't really want a small state. They don't want low public spending. They might like low taxation in principle, but they don't want the corollary of that. And that's the space that Labour are occupying now. You know, we've got a low growth, high tax economy with the Tories. We'll have a high growth, fair tax economy under Labour. And I think the rise of Rachel Reeves during this year has been one of the most significant developments that shows Labour's ready for government.
I have to say, I would have preferred it if instead of you said fair tax there, you said low tax. But I suppose we'll have to part ways there. Thank you very much, John McTernan, for coming on this morning to talk about the situation that Labour finds itself in 2021 going in to 2022. Well, the Omicron coronavirus variant has led to a new wave of restrictions being announced across the United Kingdom. In Northern Ireland, nightclubs will have to close from Boxing Day, and Scotland will impose restrictions on hospitality and household mixing from the 27th of December. Wales has moved to COVID alert level 2, meaning the rule of 6 is coming back for pubs and restaurants, and large house parties will be banned too. So should England follow suit? What does the data say? Well, let's speak to Dr. Andrew Lillico now, the Executive Director of Europe Economics, a leading economic consultancy, and someone who's become prolific online as a really quite accurate armchair epidemiologist. Welcome to the programme, Andrew. And I gather you're recovering from Omicron yourself. First of all, are you feeling OK?
Yes, not too bad. I'm just about recovered. I think you had it yourself a week or two back.
That's right. I think just about every single person in the country is going to get it over the next few weeks. The question is, will we all get it at the same time? And if we do, what kind of risk does that pose to the NHS?
Well, if everybody got it at the same time, then the NHS would come under some pressure. I don't think it's very likely that we're all going to get it at the same time. From the data at the moment, it seems to be clear that the wave has peaked, at least for now, in much the same way as happened in South Africa. Or if not actually peaked, it's very flat at the moment. Maybe has peaked in London, and the reality is that the evidence seems to be that Omicron's a little bit milder overall, and in particular, it's milder in respect of when people end up going to hospital, they stay there for less time. So that means that when we begin at the moment with far fewer people in hospital with COVID than we had, say, a year ago, and that means that there's quite a lot of scope for us to have quite a lot of additional hospitalizations before we get too much pressure on the NHS. And if we add into the mix there that a lot of those hospitalizations might be for quite a short period of time, then that's very helpful for the ability to bear hospitalization burden overall.
What we've seen with the other administrations in the United Kingdom, with Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, not imposing restrictions for Christmas, but imposing restrictions thereafter, do you think that's going to look like an error as we move forward, or is it just too early to say?
I think it's fairly clearly an error. The time when there was potentially an issue was the intergenerational mixing at Christmas. I mean, presumably, I would have thought that the whole point of any restrictions or advice or anything that you did should have been to minimise the risk that you had very large numbers of young people who then suddenly all mixed with who were sick, who mixed with older people, and then those older people got it. So I would have been advising the older people to be shielding probably for the past week or two already, and for other people to have put back their meeting with older people into the new year. And that's what I'm doing. For example, I'm not meeting my mother until into the new year. And I would have thought that was pretty much common sense. I find the idea that you encourage everybody to meet at Christmas and then you don't don't try to encourage any kind of smoothing of that process, but then you say we're going to have restrictions after the point at which the maximum danger is passed, just seems very peculiar to me as an idea. It's exactly the wrong way around.
Entered the worst of both worlds, or at least 3/4 of the United Kingdom have entered the worst of both worlds and have got this completely the wrong way round. I wonder if this means that now England will not go into any of these restrictions. I suppose this depends on what the epidemiological picture looks like. I suppose the argument is that things have turned a corner in London because no one's going out to the cinema, no one's going out to the theatre, restaurant bookings are being cancelled. We've seen this across the news over the last week. It's taken a very hard hit on hospitality. No one is really going out and mixing. Is that the reason why we seem to have turned a corner in infections?
I mean, it will be part of it. I suspect that the working from home is quite a large element as well. When we've had past waves, London has been particularly effective at changing its behaviour. Some combination of voluntary changes and government mandated effects having large effects in London itself. London tends to be able to adjust its behaviour a bit more than other parts of the country and a bit more rapidly. It has a large capacity for people to work from home, and once you eliminate things like some of the commuting or moving around on the heavily packed public transport, that has quite a large effect on R. So I wouldn't necessarily assume that everywhere we'll be able to adjust things as rapidly as London has done. But I think that that's clearly a significant part of what's going on here. Some of that would have happened anyway. I mean, the main time when people do all of their sort of partying is a little bit earlier in December. So it might be that some of that would have softened off. Certainly would have softened off once you come into the Christmas period itself. And a lot of people move out of London and go and visit relatives in other parts of the country, things like that. So I think quite a lot of that was sort of baked into the process anyway. But I agree that that's a large element of what's going on. Now, the thing about that is, does that mean that once we get into the new year, then we're going to have some new wave? Well, we might have a bit. I mean, I don't think that's that likely. But suppose that we did. I don't think that that's particularly problematic, because the thing with Omicron wasn't that the virus itself, given our very high levels of vaccination, and in fact it turns out it seems to be intrinsically milder as well, it wasn't that it was a particularly dangerous virus in terms of how harmful it was. The danger of it was that everyone was going to get infected at the same time. But what's happened now is we had a load of people infected, and if we've now taken the peak off such that this peak is going to come nowhere near threatening the overwhelming of the NHS, we'd have to have a very strange thing happened subsequently for us to end up with enough more people infected once we came into the new year to really create any kind of problem. And I think that that's very unlikely. It seems to me that if we've seen the peak occur in London, if we've really seen that, as opposed to it being something like people not wanting to test ahead of Christmas or something like that, if we've really seen the peak in infections already, it seems very unlikely to me that we could have a serious peak that was 6 or 8 times higher once we came into January. I just don't think that that's plausible at all on the numbers.
So just quickly and lastly now, you expect that there'll be no need for further restrictions in England, and it could well be that England's played this just about all right, and the rest of the United Kingdom ends up looking a little bit silly with restrictions.
Yes, so I think that we've come close to doing the right thing in England through some combination of happenstance and political processes, and I think that we will tough it out, and I think it'll be okay. I think other parts of the country seem to have got it slightly wrong. I doubt they've got it disastrously wrong, but we'll see what they actually do. Another thing I think is worth noting is that in England, some of these things, for example, even with, say, COVID status passports, those kinds of measures that came in with Plan B, those seem likely now to be, at least the intention seems to be for them to come in February. And by then, Omicron will have gone. And so I don't think any of that will ever happen. I think that will just seem like an irrelevance once the measure actually comes to the time when it was going to be introduced. And none of that, actually, kind of half of Plan B is never even going to happen at all.
Well, really interesting analysis there. Dr. Andrew Lillico, thank you for joining us this morning on The Briefing, and happy Christmas. Well, let's turn to the polling situation now across the country. It has been an interesting period. The Tories started off miles ahead at the beginning of the year and now are miles behind. Let's look through those trends now with Adam Drummond, who is Head of Political and Social Research at Opinium, a market researcher based in the capital. Welcome to the programme. The Tories have taken a real dip over the last couple of weeks specifically. Have we seen this kind of change happen before? i.e., is it usual that we should expect this 2 years into a government?
Well, it's the thing that's been unusual about the Tories, especially over the last couple of years, has been that they haven't been doing what you would expect to happen for a midterm government. So they've been, either ahead or, at least tied with Labour for most of this term. Actually, to slightly amend what you said a minute ago, I was just looking at the chart, and up until November, you looked at where the Tories and Labour were in January, and then where they were in what at the time was our most recent poll, you would struggle to guess that things like the vaccine bounce and all that stuff had ever happened, because you had the two parties really quite neck and neck, sort of 40-39 each, that sort of thing. And then by the time you get to late November, they're back to being about 38-36. It's really in the last couple of weeks that you've really seen the numbers start to diverge, and you've seen Labour go from like a 2-point lead to a 9-point lead. And a similar thing happens with Boris Johnson's approval, where it goes from being sort of negative at the start of the year to being net positive or bouncing around the middle throughout the vaccine bounce, and then going back to negative in the last couple of months. And then really in the last couple of weeks is where the two really diverge, and you start to get numbers like sort of minus 35 and stuff like that. And those are the kind of numbers I don't think we've seen for a Prime Minister since the sort of late days of Theresa May, and I'm not sure what the implications are there.
It's interesting. Ordinarily, we sort of have in the past seen the situation where the Tory leader is more popular than the Tory party, but the Labour leader is less popular than the Labour Party. Are we seeing that sort of reversing now?
So the interesting thing with Labour is also that, yes, Keir Starmer has sort of stopped the bleeding after having a really sort of traumatic May period. And if you look at his chart, he basically goes, the two sort of get closer together, and then they go, they cross over back in May. And then gradually since then, it's been a process of him trying to sort of edge them back together. And he has just about done that. But Keir Starmer's numbers on approval are lower than Labour's vote share, which is not the situation that Starmer and Labour were in for most of his leadership up until earlier this year. Especially in 2020, you would see Starmer's figures being higher than Labour's vote share for quite a lot of it. So that suggests that, yes, Labour's ahead at the moment, but that it certainly shouldn't be sort of resting on its laurels or anything like that. This feels like the vote share at the moment feels like it's a very specific reaction to things like the Christmas party story and the ongoing kind of avalanche of stories putting the government in a bad light. And it also seems to be quite sort of Boris Johnson specific. So obviously we don't know what might happen if the Tories replace Boris Johnson, or even if, Omicron turns out to not be as severe as people thought. And then actually things get back to normal fairly quickly. It's possible it might bounce back, but it's also, like I said, we have not seen Boris Johnson or other prime ministers have numbers this low, so it's possible that irreparable damage has been done in the last couple of weeks.
Has there been a moment in time for any Prime Minister who's seen a crash in their ratings like this. Has any Prime Minister in recent history been able to recover such a crash?
So we didn't see it with David Cameron at any point, really. David Cameron was never particularly popular, but he was also never particularly unpopular. With Theresa May, the real damage comes when you have, obviously, after the 2017 election, you have a big hit there, and then she gradually sort of recovers it. And then the real damage that happens to her ratings and the Conservative Party's ratings at the time was Brexit being delayed after March 2019. And then at that point, it really just crashes. And then there was no recovery for her from there. So again, it's the shape of the chart is similar for what's happened to Boris Johnson recently. It's a question of whether it is such a sort of permanent loss of trust that Theresa May experienced. The other thing to note also with Johnson's numbers at the moment is that historically throughout his term, it's been, for reasons we can all probably guess, Remain voters really not liking him and Leave voters really liking him. What's changed recently is that his ratings on lots of these measures have slipped into negative territory among Leave voters as well as Remain voters. So his political base has started to really sour on him and are no longer acting as that kind of buffer against his political opponents never having positive views of him in the first place.
I suppose he won that election on the back of the promise to get Brexit done. Most people in the country think Brexit is done. Are we starting to see the Leave and Remain typology matter less and people sort of latch on to other issues as their big drivers of voting intention?
It certainly seems that way. I mean, one of the things is that Leave and Remain identities that people have proven to be slightly more enduring than party identities. But I think that mainly suggests that party identities were never that strong or had stopped being that strong since their sort of heyday, decades ago. It is interesting that obviously, North Shropshire, the Lib Dem stand a Remainer candidate, and she managed to win in a very heavily Leave seat, which suggests that current circumstances are overwhelming that a bit. I think the fact that basically Brexit happening is not in doubt in any way anymore. Like, the thing has happened, and the line that not voting for a Brexit supporting party could undo that or could have prevented that, I think is less potent. There is also the fact that Labour has very, very clearly been trying to get the message across that they've accepted this and they are not going to try and undo it or anything like that. Keir Starmer saying that he wouldn't be trying to rejoin the EU or anything like that. Maybe there is something interesting that happens if Labour start to get pressed on what they actually would want our relationship with the EU to be, because you can at least say that it's fairly clear on the Tory side what they want our relationship with the EU to be. But for the moment, its salience as an issue has certainly dropped down quite a bit. Especially given that it's been sort of crowded out by other issues such as I said, the ongoing sort of Christmas party scandals, health and the NHS and the pandemic, and then also concerns about the economy, which are coming back.
It'll be really, really interesting to see what happens to those poll numbers if it seems that Boris has called this right, if it turns out that Omicron isn't as bad as we all thought, if it turns out that we have an open England and a pretty closed Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland, that may well shift the dial, or perhaps it was a terrible mistake and it will do the opposite. I suppose we've got to wait for the new year to find out the answer to those questions. But for now, Adam Drummond of Opinium, thank you very much for joining us this morning on The Briefing. And I'm afraid that's it for the programme. Not only that interview, the programme and the year on The Briefing. The Briefing will be back in the mornings in January, but we do have exciting Christmas content for the next week as well, so do stick around for that. I'm presenting tomorrow, Christmas Eve. It will be very exciting, very fun. Coming up next, it's To The Point with Patrick Christie's and Inaya Florin Iman. But first, let's have a look at the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello, good morning. Well, the weather's a good bit more unsettled now for the next few days. We've got some rain moving its way northeastwards across the UK today. Still some snow likely across northern Scotland tonight, but milder towards the southwest. And you can see we've got low pressure dominating the North Atlantic now, and this is going to be pushing in a selection of weather fronts from time to time over the next few days. Wednesday's weather fronts tended to fizzle out, but only to be replaced by the next set coming in from the southwest. So still the remnants of Wednesday's rain across central and northern Scotland, perhaps a bit of hill snow too. Elsewhere, though, a drier, perhaps briefly brighter interlude for eastern England, but otherwise we've got the next band of rain coming in from the southwest. Not too much across England and Wales, but for northern England, parts of Northern Ireland, certainly for Scotland, ended up being another quite wet day with quite persistent rain across Scotland and some hill snow developing on the northern edge of this front over the mountains. Cold in the north, but still quite mild actually in the south, temperatures well into double figures. And then a wet night to come across parts of Scotland in particular, with potential for quite significant snowfall above about 400 metres. So something to bear in mind if you're travelling in that part of the world. Elsewhere though, we should see another drier interlude with a few clear spells coming through from time